All right, let's get into it. We're going to unpack the story of a system, a project so ambitious it tried to map reality itself. But the real story here isn't about its success. It's about why its own creators suddenly slammed on the brakes.
The architect of this whole thing, this OntoMesh, said it didn't start with some grand plan. It started with just a question. And that's really key, this idea that it was a journey of discovery, not a fixed blueprint from day one. It helps explain the wild turns this thing was about to take.
And what a wild journey it was. I mean, think about this. You publish a blueprint for reality itself, and then you completely overhaul it. And then you do it again, all in less than 2 weeks. That's the core of the story we're unpacking today.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning. We're going back to December 3rd, 2025. This is when version 1.0 dropped, the very first crack at this map of everything.
Now, when they say civilization architecture, don't picture blueprints for buildings. No. The architect described it as something much deeper, like a structural grammar. Think of it as the underlying rules for how really complex things, like our own minds, or even whole societies, organize themselves and evolve.
So this first version, it laid out this grammar using 3 core ideas, or axes, almost like a 3D grid for reality itself. First, you've got UTI. That's all about the patterns you see repeating everywhere. Think the spiral of a galaxy and the spiral in a seashell. Same pattern, different scales. Then there's PTI, which is about the big, sudden jumps in complexity. Like the leap from just chemicals to actual life. That's a huge one. And finally, you have HPE, which is basically the messy, living ecosystem where all this stuff happens and interacts.
So in version 1, the big formula was basically just multiplying these 3 things together. The result was this massive, unified map. It was beautiful, it was detailed, it showed how everything fit together, but it was static. It was like a photograph, not a movie.
But that static photograph was about to get a serious jolt of life, because just 9 days later, something happened. A discovery that turned this map of reality into an engine.
Just look at this timeline. The speed it's just mind-boggling. You go from a static map on December 3rd to something they're calling an infinite engine by December 12th. So what on earth happened in those 9 days?
Well, it turns out the architect found a brand new principle, something that was kind of hiding in plain sight the whole time. It's called PSTR, and that was the key that turned the whole engine on.
And this is the genius of it. PSTR is this beautifully simple looping logic. It goes like this. A process starts. That process creates a stable structure. And then, this is the magic part, that structure folds back on itself and becomes the starting point for a brand new process. It's a cycle that, in theory, could just keep going and going forever, creating more and more complexity.
Okay, so this is the absolute game changer. The entire goal of the system flipped on its head. The formula went from just multiplying things together, like finding the area of a room, to being a generative function. It's more like a recipe that can bake an infinite number of different cakes from the same ingredients. It wasn't just describing reality anymore. It was now a system capable of generating new realities. The map had literally become a motor.
So, you've just built it, an engine with infinite potential, a way to generate, anything. And what happens next? Just 3 days later, they didn't just tap the brakes, they slammed them on, hard.
Seriously, think about that for a minute. You reach the absolute pinnacle of your project. You create a tool that can grow and expand forever, and your very next move is to build an off switch and then immediately flip it? Why? Why would you do that?
And that was the bombshell in version 2.1. The release notes flat out said that PSTR, that incredibly powerful engine they had just built, was being intentionally disabled. They acknowledged it was real, it was a fundamental principle, but they were shutting it off.
And in its place, a totally different philosophy. All of a sudden, the focus wasn't on endless growth. It was on limits, on safety, on predictability. You start seeing these new terms pop up like bounded completion and unified failure domain. These were all about designing the system to know when and how it was supposed to fail safely. It was this huge shift, a recognition that a truly robust system has to understand its own breaking points.
This was a massive pivot in philosophy. The big question driving the project changed from how does this thing grow to when must this thing stop? It was a conscious choice to pick restraint over infinite ambition. And that really suggests the creators saw a real danger here, a risk of runaway complexity that was just too big to ignore.
So, what are we supposed to make of all this? This insane 12-day roller coaster from a map to a motor to an emergency brake. What's the real lesson here?
I mean, in less than 2 weeks, we saw the entire life cycle of a huge technological dream play out. First, you have the attempt to just describe the world. Then, you discover the power to generate endless new worlds. And finally, you find the wisdom to put a leash on that power.
When you get right down to it, this story isn't really about some abstract system. It's a parable for our time, isn't it? We live in an age of exponential tech, especially with AI, where the question, can we do this, is always way ahead of, should we do this? This whole story suggests that maybe the true measure of intelligence isn't just the power to create, but the wisdom to know when to hold back.
And that leaves us with one last really big question to chew on. As we're all designing the systems that are going to shape our future, is the race to build the biggest, most powerful engine really the most important one? Or is the most critical feature, the single most important innovation we can build, a really good off switch?